scales. Or half-size prints, so it's 30.
Yeah, I've been on the next about 9 months or so.
30 feet per inch. Got 390, at least 90 feet there.
Yeah, I brought my supply of candy.
Hey, what's going on? C100. This is original? I thought they pulled it. Give it a second try.
Well, yeah, it's, okay, it's working now, but for some reason, it tells me I only have 8%, but I'm plugged in.
Is it charging?
I don't know.
Doesn't seem like it's actually charging. So maybe they just
But it's plugged in.
upland review line. Yeah. So that's within the setback. That's 100%.
Yeah.
It's lighting up.
Yeah, yeah. Computers hate me.
You still have a ton of space to pull. Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
they can pull. These will go right into that. You can probably put a couple bushes.
Yeah, usually it has like a.
This looks, I hate to say it, but from this, it looks like it's right on the.
Well, they've got it on paper, so.
That's
Mics are on.
So there's your hotspots. 1.10. Yeah, right in the front. Well, in the front, down through here.
Okay, I want to welcome everybody to the Town Planning and Zoning meeting for September 12th. If you could all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, approval of the agenda. I'll turn it over to our town planner for some adjustments.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend making 4 changes. I recommend deleting under public hearing items C and C and B, special permit for the interior lot at 179 Meadow Street. I'm sorry, just that one public hearing, item C, the special permit for interior lot at 179 Meadow Street. That application is not ready to go forward.
So we're going to table that?
Correct,
Okay.
and it will be on your agenda again next meeting. And then related to that, under new business, remove item new business B, petition 30-18, the subdivision for 179 Meadow Street.
That table or?
We're going to just table.
Well, just technically, you don't table it because there's no motion. Just take it off the agenda.
Okay.
Remove it from the agenda.
Okay.
And then add under new business, item C, and there's a handout in front of you. This is for Rizzo Pool. It's for their, they've had a tent sale every year for the past number of years, and they want to do it in September, but, and the application came in the day after the agenda was published, but I told Rizzo that we would add it to the agenda because it's just their usual tent sale. And then also under old business, add item A, petition 34-18, special permit for a restaurant at 2391 Berlin Turnpike. This is the pizza place that you talked about at the last meeting that I was not at. I was under the impression that it was heard and approved at the last meeting, but it wasn't. It was just heard and continued to tonight for approval. So if you would put that on under old business also. And these are all written in your envelope. There's a description of all, or the actual petition for each of these 4 items.
Yeah, that was the one in this one here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, before we proceed, does everybody in agreement with that change of the, okay. If we could have the attendance taken.
Sure. Chairman Aida, Commissioner Camillo, Commissioner Claffey,
Here.
Commissioner Fox,
Here.
Commissioner Payne,
Here.
Commissioner Sobieski,
Here.
Commissioner Woods,
Here.
Commissioner Batalica, Commissioner Braverman, Commissioner Giangrave.
Thank you very much, Noreen. Okay, we're going to do public participation now for items not listed on the agenda. Speakers limited to 2 minutes. Is there anybody from the public that would like to come up and speak? Please come up now. Anybody? All right, we're going to move on to our zoning enforcement officer report, which is going to be done by our planner.
Okay, the report is in the packet, and as you all know, Mike D'Amato left us last month, so I've been filling in for him doing zoning enforcement. So if anybody has any questions about other items, any items that are on your list, I will try to answer. I may not be aware of them, but I'll try. But of course, if there are any new issues that you want to bring to my attention for me to work on, I will make a note of that.
Does anybody have anything?
Or questions? Yeah.
How are we with, I brought this up probably 5 times now.
8th Street?
8th Street, Buena Vista.
I think because of the transition, I don't know whether or not our planner knows what you're talking about because of the transition, unfortunately. But I will discuss it with the town planner because I'm well aware of what you're talking about. And I don't know if you, Anthony, or some of the other commissioners think that it might be useful. Maybe at one of our upcoming meetings, we could have a chit chat about enforcement. And because we have a new enforcement agent coming on, maybe you might want to talk about methods for the new enforcement employee to follow for better enforcement. Just throwing it out there, whether or not you'd like to get that on the agenda. Maybe not next meeting, but one of these meetings that we have that we're not too busy. Is that, yes, Commissioner?
Quick question, do we know when he's gonna start, or has it been advertised yet or not? I mean, I was just wondering how quickly
I
we have to
think it's
move on
being
this.
advertised now.
Right, and the deadline to apply is September 18th. So hopefully we'll have somebody by early October.
So probably the first meeting in October, we could get the schedule maybe, or sooner if you want?
Yeah, I don't see any reason why we can't squeeze it into the agenda, one of these next couple of
Okay.
meetings. I'll leave it up to the planner to, depending on the schedule. So we could leave, 15 minutes to talk about that subject. All right?
Thank you.
Okay. No other remarks from commissioners? All right, we're going to proceed with the public hearing, petition 24-18. If I could have a commissioner read that?
Petition 24-18, zoning text amendment. New section 3.26, workforce assisted housing district.
Mr. Chairman, did you mean to go to the public hearing? The next item on the agenda was public I'm sorry, was remarks by commissioners?
Yep, I took
okay.
care of that.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Commissioner. Continue, please.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Where were we? Oh, in accordance with Connecticut General Statutes, Section 8-30G of the Connecticut General Statutes. Dakota Partners, Inc., applicant Timothy S. Hollister, 1 Constitution Plaza, Hartford, Connecticut. Contact.
And could you also read the next petition, 25-18? We're going to group that in with it.
Yes, give me a second. Petition number 25-18, zoning map amendment, WAHD at 550 Cedar Street in accordance with CGS Section 8-30G. Dakota Partners Incorporated, applicant, 550 Cedar Street Associates LLC, owner. Timothy S. Hollister, contact.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to the attorney, and I'm going to ask him if any site plan issues you would save for our petition 26-18 unless it was a question asked by the public that you feel that you want to address under this section.
Okay, well, Tim Hollister for the record. I think most of what we have to say is responses to questions from the August 8th and August 22nd, and certainly when we're talking about the soil remediation plan, that's directly related to the rezoning. So I think the answer to your question is yes, and we should be fine with that. Commissioner Fox, there are some materials for each commissioner. If I could ask you to just take one and pass it down. Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, ladies and gentlemen, the public, the same development team as has been here with us also tonight, Will Walter, our professional engineer, Steve Ullman, our traffic engineer, Jesse Thompson, our architect. We're also joined tonight by Robert Bristol from Geo Insight, who is not part of the development team, but has been part of the group that has been working on the soil remediation aspect, as you'll hear. Just to bring the commissioners and the town planner up to speed on where we are. As promised, when we were here on August 22nd, we filed the soil remediation plan on August 29th. We filed a revised site plan that relocated Building A in the clubhouse on September 5th. And then I filed a supplemental memo on September 6th that had our narrative responses to questions that were raised at the 2 August public hearings. We are going to be in front of the Wetlands, the Conservation Commission on our wetlands permit application, which will also address the soil remediation plan from an environmental standpoint next Tuesday. And just to jump ahead, for that reason, it would be prudent to keep the hearing open tonight, just because we will be having a public hearing at Conservation next week. So I will give Mr. Minor an extension to the, certainly to the 26th, I believe, of September. Now, I've just given you a little bit of supplemental information. I'll just go through what that is. The first is, as I think some of you know, Dakota has also been pursuing a very similar development to what's in front of you in the town of Griswold, 144 units, the same residential program, and that was approved on Monday night of this week. But during that hearing, a question came up about the tenant screening program. So you may recall from the first presentation, Dakota uses a residential management company called Hall Keen. And so the first item I've given you is their applicant screening policy. And through Mr. Minor's office, the Chief Clark sent a question today whether absolute disqualifiers would be arrests or convictions for serious assault, firearms violation, sale of narcotics, promoting prostitution, or sexual assault, and the answer is yes. Those would all be disqualifiers. But, of course, the screening process goes beyond that in the sense that it's a credit check, a financial check, a criminal background check, and a review of any sex offender registry, and it goes into other states and so forth. Second item is just the narrative portion. When we rearranged the two buildings, that somewhat changed the stormwater analysis. Mr. Walter has been through that revised analysis with Mr. Furstenberg, your town engineer, but I just thought it would be prudent to give you a copy of the narrative portion of the stormwater plan. And then third, and I now realize you may already have copies of this, but it's the three revised architectural elevation sheets, and Mr. Thompson will explain those when we get to that part of the agenda. Now, before we go over our responses to the questions from the last two hearings and further discussion of the regulation change in the site plan, I want to make a couple of sort of overarching points, which I think maybe are important at this point in the proceedings. The first is I would like to emphasize that the applicant is trying very hard to work with the Commission, the Conservation Commission, the town staff, and the public in these respects. Number one is in response to the concern expressed by the Conservation Commission about the large building, Building A, being at the top of, on the west side, at the top of the slope. As you know, we have now relocated that Building A to the southeast corner of the site and put the much smaller clubhouse there. And I think that was a good answer to the concern that was expressed, and it's made a big difference in the grading and the stormwater plan, and an improvement, I think. Number two is back in mid-August, Mr. Minor submitted to Dakota a fairly lengthy list of suggestions, requests for exterior design changes and interior amenity additions. We submitted to you on the 22nd of August when we were here a letter going through that list, and we have now incorporated that formally into Schedule B, which is part of the affordability plan. And that is it's important to recognize that is the minimum specifications, what we are requiring of ourselves and what the commission can require of Dakota as a matter of zoning enforcement. And it includes things like Wi-Fi and wood panel doors and a whole bunch of things that Mr. Thompson will review with you. But the point is, we basically accepted just about everything that was asked.
I don't want to interrupt you, but the commission hasn't had a chance really to vet that list yet. That came from the planner.
Yes.
And the commission hasn't had a chance to talk about it. So there might be some things on there that the commission might feel aren't totally necessary, so it might change a little.
Right, and Mr. Thompson's going to go through those items, and that would certainly be the right time to discuss that. And we are, I said, we're here to try to work with you, and if there's things that we want to change, amend, we can do that. As you'll hear, there have been some exterior design, architectural enhancements, and finally, we did try to respond to every question. There were extensive comments, as you recall, about traffic, so Mr. Ullman has already submitted additional information about Alumni Road, about the possible fast-track train station, about Cedar Street conditions, and about sidewalks. So two points about traffic, again, because that was kind of the major focus of the last time we were here. I assume the commission understands, but I just want to repeat for the record. The applicant's obligation in a situation like this is not to fix existing conditions, but to make sure, I mean, if improvements are possible, you know, we will offer them. But the point is, the applicant's obligation is to maintain levels of service at nearby intersections and to make sure there are no safety concerns for tenants or pedestrians. And I believe our submissions have demonstrated that. The police commission, police department has accepted our traffic study with the condition that we modify the traffic signal at the site's frontage on Cedar Street, and we've agreed to do that. The other thing that I think is important here is that the relevant comparison is not 108 apartments versus a vacant site. This comparison is 108 apartments versus what the allowable commercial uses are in the PD zone, which could be a big box retailer, it could be a supermarket, and Mr. Ullman will have a few remarks about that. Regarding the soil plan, the suitability of this property for a residential development, there is no question that this site today is not suitable for residential development because it is impacted in several spots by petroleum products left over from the automotive use. But it's very important that the commission and the public understand that environmentally impacted sites generally do not get cleaned up until there is a specific redevelopment plan, because it's not until there is a plan that the owner, the purchaser, the developer, the Department of Environmental Protection, and any licensed environmental professional knows where to clean up, how much to clean up, and to what standard. So it's very important everybody understand it's the redevelopment that spurs the cleanup. And the cleanup also needs to be coordinated with the new construction, because it would make no sense to, excavate the soil, take it off site, refill that with clean soil, and then dig it up again for construction. That would be completely inefficient and unnecessary. So with all due respect to some of the members of the public who suggested, well, clean up the site first and then come back with a zoning application, that's simply not how the process works. So I just wanted to make that point initially. Okay, so I've given you a short outline. We're going to have Mr. Walter give you a little more specifics about the site plan revisions, and then we'll get into the soil plan and finish up with traffic and architecture.
Can I ask you a question first?
Yes, sir.
On the environmental cleanup, I think you put a condition that you wouldn't, about COs not being given until the site was cleaned up.
Right.
My question to you is, wouldn't they be able to do the cleanup and then proceed taking a building permit out for your foundations and then proceed? And couldn't that be the condition that you don't receive a building permit for your foundations until you show that the property is cleaned up?
I'm going to let Mr. Walter and Mr. Bristol, I think I know the answer, but I don't want to misspeak. So you guys have that question? The sequence of the building permit and the cleanup, yeah. I think it has to do with coordinating the site remediation with the construction, but we'll get into that.
Okay.
Good evening. For the record, Will Walter, professional engineer with Alfred Burnesh and Company. Mr. Minor, would you please go to the first rendering? Okay, so this is something that we presented at the last public hearing as a concept. And the main revision here is taking the building off the western slope, which is at the bottom of the page, and sticking it in the southeast corner, which is at the upper right of the project, and then taking the clubhouse and putting it where that building was. This is mainly in response to concerns by the Inland Wetlands Commission. That there is a slope over there, and that slope is in the buffer. I mean, the wetlands is way down at the bottom of the slope in the railroad area, but that slope is in the upland review area, and they were concerned that if the building was there was two concerns. One, there would be potentially residents throwing garbage into the buffer area on the slope. And then the second thing was they were concerned about the stability of that slope with the building sitting on the top of it. We would have had to do some grading into the slope a little ways. So we feel like this is it's a good fix to that. It's a good alternate that we feel addresses their concerns. And again, the Wetland Commission concerns mainly are what is driving this revision. As it impacts the program, there's the exact same number of parking spaces. I've gone into great detail in the last couple of meetings about how the stormwater works. The stormwater is essentially working the same. We're still meeting our stormwater quality standards, our peak flow. detention requirements. So there's really not a whole lot to say in regards to the stormwater management, unless, of course, you want detailed specifics. I can give that. The last application, we had a number of comments from the town engineer. The majority of those comments were things like put arrows on the drainage pipes so we can see what direction the water's flowing. Check the spot grade, it might be off a little bit. Check the conflict between the sanitary and the storm, might be off a little bit. Things of that nature. I've gone through, I did a very exhaustive review. I sent about a week and a half ago a detailed set of responses to the engineering department. When I was at the engineering department, I spoke with the assistant town engineer about those. I have not heard back from him with his review of those of my responses to those comments. This plan change, really the northern half of the site really is changing very little in terms of the infrastructure, the roadways, the parking, the stormwater, the utilities. So I'm anticipating that we're going to have, I'm sure we'll have a few comments coming back, but I'm not anticipating there's anything that we're not going to be able to handle relatively quickly. Another couple of changes on this plan, and it may be hard to see, but what we're proposing is a sidewalk in the right-of-way along the frontage of this property. It will be per CONDOT specifications, so we are proposing that. Another thing we're proposing is we're putting a bus shelter on our property right inside the right-of-way, just on the west side of the entrance drive. It's kind of tough to see, but if you were to take a left in from 175, it would be on the left side. There's going to be a pad with the shelter right there, so that the parents, it's for the kids obviously who are waiting for the school bus. The school bus will not come into the site. That's their policy. So we're providing a shelter. This is something that they had suggested that we do, so we're doing that. We feel like if there's anybody that, if there's parents that are going to walk their kids to the shelter, of course there's sidewalks all throughout the site going up to the shelter. Any of the parents who would want to drive their kids, maybe they're in the buildings a little further away, there is that parking just to the north of the shelter on our site that you can see, so we feel like there's adequate room for parents to park there and then walk their kids up to the shelter to a couple hundred feet away, maybe not even. The other thing is, on the west side of the property, we are proposing a 48-inch high chain link fence. That again is a couple of concerns. One, I believe from this commission, to prevent kids from going down into the railroad right away. And then also from the Inland Wetlands Commission, they're concerned that people are just going to sweep or throw garbage into that buffer area. So we are proposing a fence on the western side over there. And then in regards to the question about the permit to pour the foundations being contingent upon a clean site, was that your question?
Yes.
So the sequence of construction and remediation, we've added a plan to our plan set that has to do with that sequence, and the plan is to first do on the northern part of the property, that's the smaller area of impact, to do that right of way, to get samples sent off to the lab at the bottom of the pits right away. And so I believe that can be made a condition that we're not going to get a permit to pour the foundations until those clean samples have come back. And then after that, we're going to move down on the western side, kind of where that parking lot is on the southwestern side. That's the other area that we're going to be, that's the impacted area. The buildings, none of the buildings' footprints are in that area. So I think it makes sense to make, I believe Building B is on the top, to make the foundation permit for Building B contingent upon the environmental engineer, reporting that has been cleaned up based upon testing results.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions for commissioners? Yes, Stanley.
Excuse me. That building that's up to the north and east there, what's the gradient from the top of the hill down to the base of the building?
The building at the very top,
Yes, off to the
Yep.
top where the black square is.
yep, it's about a 3-to-1 slope coming down. And then right around the pinch point on the southern border, it's about a 2.5-to-1 as it sweeps right around there. And that
So,
was-
we can't get emergency equipment back there. Would I be correct?
We're not getting a fire truck back there, no, but we do have a level area, certainly that emergency personnel can go back there and walk back there, but not a truck, no.
My question is, somebody's on the third floor, they gotta get out, and they can't get out the other way, how are they gonna get down? We can't get in there, are you gonna put a ladder up there?
Yeah, well, I mean, this has gone through the review of the fire marshal, and he's accepted, he had a couple of minor comments. We addressed his comments, and he's happy with the plan as it is.
So there is a small flat area behind the buildings, and then there's a small grade.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
more than a small flat area, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So there is room for a flat area for a ladder to go up. and-
absolutely.
Yep, okay. Anything else? Okay,
Yeah, quick question on the, your snow removal, now that's gonna be at the edge of the, like, the U coming out of the parking lots, am I correct?
We've identified probably 6 or 8 locations for snow storage on the plan, yep. I don't know where they're off the top of my head, I can get the plan and look at it, but
All right, thank you.
you're welcome.
all right. Is there other areas you want to touch before we go to the public?
Yeah, for the record, my name is Robert Bristol. I'm a hydrogeologist and a Connecticut licensed environmental professional with GeoInsight, which is an environmental consulting firm in Middletown, Connecticut. I have been the licensed environmental professional of record for this property since 2011. As you know, prior to June 2000, the property was occupied by an automobile dealership, which also conducted an extensive amount of vehicle maintenance and some auto body work. Due to the auto body shop being present on the property, the site was entered into the Connecticut Transfer Act back in February 2001, when it was sold to an entity of Stop and Shop. So under the Connecticut Transfer Act, Stop and Shop signed on as a certifying party and is therefore responsible for conducting the investigation and remediation of the sites in accordance with the state regulations. So in response to that Connecticut Transfer Act filing, the DEP, Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, delegated the investigation and remediation of the site to a licensed environmental professional such as myself. Under that program, we essentially act on behalf of the DEP to make sure that it is cleaned up appropriately to all the appropriate regulations. Between 2001 and 2015, Stop and Shop conducted several phases of environmental work out at the site. They, under ourselves, GeoInsight, and previous environmental consultants who had worked previously for Stop and Shop, they conducted phase 1 and 2 and 3 environmental site assessments. They removed about 1,800 tons of petroleum contaminated soil. They removed above ground storage tanks, septic tanks, a number of hydraulic lift structures that were associated with the automobile servicing work, and various waste products that were on site as part of those previous operations. Also did a sensitive receptor survey to make sure that there weren't any drinking water receptors or other types of sensitive receptors in the area of the site, which there weren't any identified. And then they also did some asbestos abatement work for some of the materials that were in the two buildings. And actually, you could please flip to the next slide, I think. So that's a site plan of what the property looked like when the auto dealership operations were on site. Those blue things are monitoring wells that were part of the investigation work that was done out there. Stop and Shop also abated some asbestos materials, and they removed those two buildings out there. The one on the right was the former automobile dealership and servicing areas, and then the smaller building on the left on the northern part of the property was the former auto body shop. So they demolished those back in 2012 after abating all the materials. So throughout that time, I believe the property was on the market, and Stop and Shop was waiting for an interested developer to come along to purchase the site, so that the remaining environmental remediation work could be conducted in line with the redevelopment plan for the site, which in this case is going to be for residential use as opposed to industrial or commercial use, which would affect what the remedial action plan would entail. When Dakota got involved more recently, Stop and Shop had GeoInsights conduct a very comprehensive phase 1 investigation out there, where we really, to further delineate the environmental impacts, and then also develop a remedial action plan that is consistent with the Connecticut regulations and also consistent with the development plan for the property. And that work is documented in the report, which I believe you have a copy of there. So under the Connecticut Transfer Act, as a licensed environmental professional, we're obligated to take a methodical, detailed approach to look at each environmental area of concern on the property that was associated with the former operations. During that process, just this past July and August, we collected 170 soil samples for laboratory analysis at 79 additional soil borings. We sampled 4 of the previously installed monitoring wells out at the site, and we did an updated ecological risk assessment. And again, those procedures and results are provided in that August report there. Actually, if you could please flip to the next slide. Okay, so based on the results of our additional sampling, we identified petroleum impacts to soil at several areas associated with those former operations at the 2 buildings. That there is the main auto dealership and servicing building. I believe there were approximately 18 hydraulic lifts. Most of the petroleum impacted soil is associated with those former hydraulic lift structures. The actual structures have been removed, but there is, the lifts over the many years that the facility was in operation had leaked some of that hydraulic oil to the underlying soil. So those orange boxes there, those squares are areas where we did identify petroleum impacted soil. And again, most of those are associated with the hydraulic lifts. There also are some smaller, shallow soil impacts around the building, and as well as one area along the embankment there, kind of on the bottom of the figure, where there's some shallow petroleum and lead impacts to soil that we think was associated with some lead acid batteries or possibly some waste oil that got spilled there along the embankment. And then if you'll please flip to the next slide. This is the former auto body shop, and there's also 3 areas there, those orange squares, where there's also some localized petroleum impacted soil that were associated with those operations at that facility. As I mentioned, we sampled for the previously installed monitoring wells that were down gradient from those impacted soil areas. We did not find any impacts to the groundwater hydraulically down gradient from those soil impacts. So it does not appear that the contamination is migrating off-site. It appears to be very localized to those orange areas. Also, we didn't identify any PCBs or elevated volatile organic compounds, which can sometimes be associated with these types of facilities, especially the auto body. And that's actually the reason why Stop and Shop was required to enter the property into the Transfer Act, is because of the presence of the auto body, and we really didn't find much in the way of impacts associated with that auto body. We didn't find any elevated volatile organic compounds. We also, as part of the ecological risk assessments, we collected a sediment sample down gradient from the auto body shop, and also did not find any impacts to the sediment from that facility. So anyway, so based on the investigation results, we developed a remedial action plan, again, intending to be consistent with the redevelopment plan for the site, as well as the Connecticut regulations. And that information is also contained in that same report from August of this year. For soil, we're required to comply with 2 sets of criteria under the Connecticut regulations. One set is the residential direct exposure criteria, because it will be used for residential purposes. And the direct exposure criteria, therefore, it's the residential set of criteria which are more stringent than the industrial commercial direct exposure criteria. And then the other set of criteria is the GB pollutant mobility criteria, which apply to impacted soil that may be a source of contamination to underlying groundwater. The remedial action plan, again, we have that spelled out in that report. And there's several components, but there's really 3 main components that are part of the remedial action plan for complying with the Connecticut regulations. And if you could please flip to the next slide. This is a figure that overlays the former buildings with the current development plan for the site, and it also includes those orange box remediation areas that were on the last two slides. So it kind of shows you in relation to what the future development plan is going to be. So the remedial action plan, the 3 main components are to remove all of the soil that exceeds the GB pollutant mobility criteria. And any of the soil that's being brought off site, it's being brought off by manifest to licensed facilities that are licensed to handle this petroleum contaminated soil. The second component is to remove remaining soil that exceeds the residential direct exposure criteria, including a depth above 4 feet in an environmental land use restriction area that we have in, it's kind of a bluish green box there, mostly underlying where that former main building area is. And then in other areas that are outside of that environmental, and I'll talk about the environmental land use restriction in a minute, and so for areas outside of that environmental land use restriction, we remove all of the soil that exceeds the residential direct exposure criteria. And then the third component of the remedial action plan is to implement an environmental land use restriction for that soil, for the petroleum impacted soil that's below a depth of 4 feet that exceeds the residential direct exposure criteria, making the soil inaccessible in accordance with Connecticut regulations. And an environmental land use restriction is an EALER. It's, we refer to it as an EALER. It's an easement granted to the commissioner of the Connecticut DEP under very specific circumstances that are considered by the DEP to be fully protective of human health and the environment. The environmental land use restriction requires DEP and approval prior to implementation. So it's a very prescriptive process that you would need to go through in order to be able to implement the environmental land use restriction. So once the remediation tasks are completed, there are other tasks that will also be required under, again, the Connecticut Transfer Act, and these are also spelled out in that August report. We are required to conduct a minimum of 4 quarters of groundwater compliance monitoring. We anticipate that many of the existing monitoring wells out there now are going to get destroyed in the remediation, in the redevelopment process, rather. So once the redevelopment is complete, we would need to replace many of those groundwater monitoring wells so that we can do the groundwater compliance monitoring. And then there's also reports to the Connecticut DEP that are required, including a report to document the procedures and results of our remediation tasks that are outlined in that remedial action plan, and then also a final verification report to document that all of the investigation and remediation tasks have been completed in accordance with Connecticut regulations, including the Transfer Act. So these subsequent tasks, it's important to note that the environmental land use restriction, the groundwater compliance monitoring, including the installation of additional monitoring wells, and then the final verification would probably require about a year once the actual remediation is complete in order to be able to complete that process. So I can take any questions.
Yeah, I was wondering if you're familiar with the old GE site, which is now going to be becoming the Harding High School, how you could compare that site to this site? You're not familiar with it?
I'm really not. Sorry, I'm not familiar.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a point that was there was lead, arsenic, petroleum. It was a highly toxic brownfield, and it was able to be cleaned up, and now it's going to become a new high school. That was all. Any other questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Fox.
Thank you. Thank you for that report, Mr. Bristol. On this particular plan here, all those little rectangles, and I can hardly see them, am I to assume that those are the only areas of concern that are left to be remediated?
Yes, that's correct. Those orange boxes, and there's a copy of that in that report that if that's hard to see for you, Figure 7. But yeah, each of those little orange squares are the soil remediation areas.
Okay. One more question, Mr. Chairman, through the chairman. In your tables, and I may be going somewhere where I don't know too much about, which is everything on this thing. I notice on the couple of tables here that you have an awful lot of blank cells here. Is that because, what's the reason? I mean, were those particular items already remediated, or you're just not?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When we investigate a site of this nature, we go through a kind of a systematic process of identifying environmental areas of concern. And so each specific area that might be considered of environmental concern, such as a hydraulic lift, or if there's a septic system, or if there's an above-ground storage tank, each one of those are considered an area of concern. And then there's specific compounds of concern, constituents that would be associated with each area. So a hydraulic lift, for example, it would have, obviously petroleum, but also sometimes there's metals and VOCs and other compounds. And so you want to make sure that you investigate each area of concern for those specific compounds. And so A lot of those blanks are due to the fact that not all those constituents apply to all the environmental areas of concern. And some of the blanks also are that, we select several samples from each area for those specific compounds, but once we've kind of ruled them out for a particular area, then going forward, we generally don't sample for those same compounds at that same area.
Thank you.
Commissioner Woods?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Were you surprised by the no PCBs in those areas? Because usually PCBs are related to the hydraulic lifts,
Yeah,
especially because of the age of the building.
yeah, we've certainly found PCBs at sites that do have hydraulic oil, especially older sites that have been in operation many years. Sometimes they're associated with waste oil that might have been used. Recycled hydraulic oil, where sometimes you do get PCBs. But we did samples throughout the site and didn't find PCBs associated with those areas.
And I'm assuming at some point there had to be gasoline storage. And again, I'm assuming because of the age of the site, that storage was in-ground tanks. Is there any documentation that the tanks have been taken out?
I don't recall that there was any gasoline storage on this site. I don't think that they fueled vehicles here. They mostly serviced vehicles. They did have some above-ground tanks inside the building, and there were below-ground septic tanks that discharged waste. But I don't think there was underground tanks or gasoline usage.
If somebody could look into that, I believe there was. And I think it might have been remediated before Stop and Shop bought it. I know there was some work done prior to Stop and Shop owning the property.
Okay.
Just if we could see that documentation on it, to make sure that there is, that all the storage tanks that were in the ground are now out of the ground.
Yeah.
There is no gasoline in the ground, although I would think that if there was some gasoline in the ground, your monitoring wells would probably pick it up.
Mm-hmm.
And then if there is, and you do find it, would vapor extraction then become one of the remediations, or would you just keep excavating until all of the vapors
Hold on a
gas
minute.
is gone?
Hold on a minute, Commissioner. If you could just back up a little bit.
Okay. So just backing up a little bit, if in fact the tanks were taken out, and that it was documented that the area was cleaned up, and if that's fine, it doesn't go any further, but if it wasn't, to find out why, I guess.
Yeah, as you mentioned, if there was a gasoline release, we most likely would have found some gasoline compounds in the groundwater, because we do have many groundwater, and the groundwater has been sampled for gasoline constituents over the years, and I don't believe there was much of anything in the way of gasoline constituents. I'll go back in some of the old reports that were done back, I think, in the 90s to see if there was any gasoline underground tanks. I believe there was a ground penetrating radar survey that was done back when Stop and Shop first acquired it, just for that reason, to make sure that there weren't any remaining underground storage tanks. But I'll go back and I'll confirm that.
Okay. And just one more thing, with the underground tanks too, could you confirm or deny, was it heated with gas prior or diesel,
The
fuel
buildings?
oil? So, yeah, no, the building themselves, yes.
Yeah, I don't recall, to be honest. I knew that answer at one time, but I forget, yeah.
And I know
I'll
you
confirm
go
that
back
as
a long
well.
way, so a lot of time has gone by. But if you could get those answers for me, I would appreciate it.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Sobieski?
Yes, how deep are you gonna go in those contaminated areas?
Yeah, so, again, it's a little bit hard to see up on that screen, but in the packet,
right, yeah.
you can read it. And so there is some numbers next to each one of those little orange boxes, and it shows the depth intervals that we did find the deep petroleum. Most of the Petroleum is below a depth of 6 feet at the hydraulic lifts, just because that's the construction of the hydraulic lifts. But I believe our deepest one is down to 15 feet. Many of the lifts are down to 14 feet. And then a lot of the areas outside of the,
Figure 5? Thank you.
oh, yeah, I'm sorry. And a lot of the areas outside the buildings are lower, 5 feet, 2 feet generally.
All right, so you're gonna go down to where, till it stops becoming contaminated, am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner?
Just on that, when you do this, when you do the excavation, and you being a licensed professional here, you or yourself are gonna have somebody there with you, and there's sampling done, correct? So the hole doesn't get backfilled until the samples come back that the area is clean. So if you need to dig down another 2 feet, or the hole needs to be 5 feet wider, that continues until you come up with clean samples, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And this is laid out in that remedial action plan, but during each one of those excavations, we are required to collect confirmation samples from the sidewalls and also from the base of the excavation in order to be able to demonstrate that we have met requirements for removing that soil.
And that, I just wanted to try to make sure the public understood that it's not you just come in and dig a 6x6 hole, because that's what you have identified on a plan.
Yep.
That in fact you are there, or someone from your firm is there and doing testing, so that hole could double or triple if it needed to be. And you keep going until the samples come back clean.
Yeah, GeoInsight will be on site working closely with the contractor during that process to monitor it and then to collect samples afterwards. And if there is an exceedance, then obviously the excavation would be extended in that area.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Any other commissioners' questions?
Yeah, I can probably defer that to later. I think Will answered that pretty well as far as like the sequence of the construction and the soil handling.
All set. Okay. Anything else before we go to public hearing? The public.
Good evening. My name is Steve Olm. I'm a professional engineer in the state of Connecticut, employed by Alfred Benish and Company of Glastonbury, Connecticut. I did the traffic study, and I've presented to this board before. Just going to touch on 3 things real quick that came up at the last meeting. First, last meeting I gave a brief summary of what would happen if Myra Cohen Way was developed and if the New Haven Hartford line had a train station, if they ever build it, down across the street from our site. The information I had gotten, people I had talked to said around 200 spaces they were thinking. Commissioner Sobieski said, well, he had heard 300. I crunched the numbers, and the difference between a 200 or 300 parking space facility is a total of 378 trips for the whole day. 40 trips in the morning and 54 in the afternoon. I also found, I wish I brought a copy of it, that as they were looking at it, as they looked at a very larger facility, they were also looking at possibly taking their drives and have a drive or more to Maple Hill Road. So they'd have not only to Cedar Street, but possibly go out. Depends on how much land they're going to take on that industrial property. The bigger it is, the more buildings are going to take down. So, you know, but that's really well beyond us. My gut is we'll be up, running, occupied before they even get the study undergoing on it. But I did find out. So it is somewhat larger, but it's not significantly a larger amount of traffic. Second was, Attorney Hollister brought up, what would the comparison in traffic be if we were to put a supermarket or a commercial development on the site? Using the same basic math I had for Myra Cohen Way area, I assumed about 40,000 square feet of shopping center on our site. If you were to give variances for parking and setbacks, it might be larger, but 40 is a very doable number on the site. That would generate an ADT of 3224 trips during the day, 172 in the morning, and 276 trips in the afternoon. As a variance, that's 120 more trips in the morning and 213 trips more in the afternoon. So this is a much smaller use. Of course, with that additional traffic, you'd have to look at the traffic differently. And the last item was, someone in the public had mentioned there was a discrepancy in the amount of traffic entering and leaving the site during the morning and the afternoon. I heard the comment, but I can't remember what the whole point was. I thought it was that the number of people leaving in the morning heading west or east is different than the people coming back. Typically that's true, because typically most developments generate a different number of trips in the morning than they do in the afternoon. The reason I'm kind of flummoxed by the comment is this is a rare site where the number of people leaving in the morning is identical to the number of people arriving in the afternoon. It's 40 trips. So I had 28 vehicles leaving towards the west in the morning and 28 approaching from the west in the afternoon. But because developments generate trips at different levels, you will see differences. And in fact, in the trip generation for the entering and exiting opposite of that is actually significantly higher number of vehicles leaving the site in the evening than there are approaching in the morning. So, but that's just because the way people approach, especially in a residential development, depending on where you work, what hours you work, and everything else, you may or may not leave or may or not return in the peak hour. So, and I'm here to answer any questions that you may have at this point.
Thank you very much. Questions from commissioners? Commissioner Sobieski.
One quick thing. I noticed you didn't cover it, but I'm going to look at this here, that I think Attorney Hollister said that the question was with emergency vehicles, people will pull out of the way to get out to respond to the site. My question is, at peak hours, you got 4 lanes of solid traffic. Something happens, how do they get there?
The police chief, I think, answered that.
I'm saying at 4:30, 5 o'clock, you've got 2 lanes of solid traffic all the way up.
They
both
pull down.
directions.
They pull down. They turn on the lights and the siren, and they pull down the middle of the road.
If there's no place for them to pull over, that's my question.
They must do it because.
Okay, that's of concern to me. I'm just bringing it out.
Then it would be a concern to every business that's open down there on that street. And I think the police chief, if I'm not answered that, Tom Planner, who answered that?
I wasn't here at the last meeting, so I
It
don't
was
know
in
who it
your.
was.
It was in the report.
Lieutenant Morgan.
Well, the local
Okay,
traffic.
Lieutenant Morgan did? Yeah, so there's a regulation on it, and they would turn on their siren and lights, and they would, force people to pull over. It's difficult, but they do it. Commissioner Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been on there back and forth, many a times going east, coming from Yukon Health Center or something like that. And it would be a lot more than difficult. And, we were talking, maybe this is due for site plan, at the last meeting about a dedicated left turn lane. And maybe we should do what New York City did for the FDNY and the police department. Leave the middle open up. So
I think we're far from New York City.
I know, but the traffic on Cedar Street sometimes reminds me of New York City. So it's just. Thank you.
Okay, any other commissioner questions? Thank you very much.
Turn it over to the architect.
Thank you all. Jesse Thompson, Kaplan Thompson Architects. And next slide, please.
Oops, sorry, I lost it. Let's see. Keep going?
Keep going, please, yeah. And one more. So, first of all, I'd love to thank the commissioners for their comments last time. It was good to hear that the design you felt needed improvements, and so we went back to the drawing board and looked at things and thought hard about the comments you said and tried to make sure that we feel like we've come back with something that we hope fits the town better and fits the commissioner's picture of what an improved building is. So we did several things as we looked at this, and I think the most obvious thing is that we changed the overall color scheme of the building. So we changed from a sort of classic white to much warmer tones. We've working with some certainty colors, and so we've got some rich browns and some rich greens, and really tried to perhaps a more modern color palette and something with more variety to it as well. We also increase the roof overhangs. So these are a full 2-foot overhang with a thicker trim edge to give more weight on the building, give more shadow line and depth to it. We also added dormers. So we added a gable dormer to highlight at the stair edges, and then we've also added ridge vents that are help technically vent the roof and also break up the roof facade. We wanted to make sure these roofs were not one long straight line and that they had some variety to them and that there was more variety to that elevation. And even on the siding colors, we've even broken up and had decorative trim bands between them and tried to highlight that. So if you go to the next slide, please. You can see that the perhaps obvious thing is some of the color tone, but that the roofs aren't as unified. And if you go to the next slide, we zoom in a little. So you can see that the roofs, the buildings, as you get closer, have a little more variety. The colors are, warmer, earthier tones, and we're highlighting the entrances with this autumn red at the center portion. Next slide, please. You can see this, the color scheme on the end with the sable brown below and the cypress green above. And next, please. And the dormers that help break up the roof line and add some variety to the facade. And next, please. And here, when we get into detail, we're using a wide 8-inch clapboard on the base and a 4-inch clapboard on the upper side, so that there's a difference in siding depth and profile there. And then at the entrance, it's a composite siding profile with a nickel gap in between it, so it's a heavier, tougher, more depth to it, more shadow line at the center line there. So next, please. And so that's the basic overview of the general changes we've made, and we thank you for your comments and hope that this has been an improvement that that is appreciated and that
Thank you very much
helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll go to questions in a second.
Sorry, one last piece.
Sure.
We just want to go over in quick detail the Schedule B of the interior improvements that are hopefully in line with some of the suggestions so that we can read into the record. But these are the commitments of interior finishes that these buildings will have. They will all have non-smoking interiors. They will have durable carpet or rubber treads and risers in all stairwells, so they'll be quiet. And all the maintenance and facilities areas will have finished concrete or wall-to-wall vinyl tile for good maintenance and durability. Flooring in the units will be wall-to-wall vinyl plank or wall-to-wall carpet in bedrooms. The heating and cooling system will be a ducted system. It'll be air source heat pumps most likely, and it will have heating and cooling. There'll be programmable thermostats. There will be an addressable fire alarm system with heat detection, and direct wire smoke and CO detectors. And I think per the commissioner's comments, each one of these buildings will have 2 full stair towers, 2-hour protection, full sprinkler systems. We expect these to be very safe buildings at their base level. Easy Care vinyl-clad closet shelving, pre-wired telephone, cable TV, and Wi-Fi outlets, multi-camera monitoring system for common areas, elevators, and basements. There'll be bright lighting in common areas and access ways. I think we already actually mentioned the ductless heating. There'll be a full fresh air ventilation system in this building, so there'll be ducted fresh air to all bedrooms and exhaust from all kitchens and bathrooms, and with heat recovery. There'll be a center gas-fired hot water system with a demand-controlled recirc loop for all these. There'll be water-efficient toilets, well-insulated walls between units, meeting full STC standards. The apartment entry doors will be vandal-resistant with grade 1 restricted keyway lock sets and deadbolts. High-quality hard surfaces for all common areas and entries. There'll be a common laundry area with washer and dryer facilities. All electric circuits will be ground fault protected in kitchen, bathrooms, and garage. Colonial 6-panel doors on the entryways, 8-foot minimum ceiling heights, horizontal louver blinds for privacy on all windows. The kitchens will have vinyl plank or sheet vinyl wood cabinets, laminate countertops with an integrated backsplash, GE electric range, GE refrigerator with self-defrosting freezer, and it'll be Energy Star, a sound-insulated multi-cycle dishwasher, a stainless steel sink with a single-level faucet. The bathrooms will have a full-width vanity mirror, single-piece acrylic tubs and shower surrounds, laminate vanity tops, and sheet vinyl flooring. So, thank you.
Mr. Thompson, are you reading from something that you submitted, or is that
Correct. That was in the responses document that came from Attorney Hollister.
dated today? With the,
September 6th.
okay,
And
thank you.
it's Schedule B.
Thank you.
So I can sit
Thank
to answer questions, or?
Thank you very much. Yes. First of all, if it's possible, could you bring us samples of the siding for colors, the shingles, whether it's architectural shingles or not, of all the products that you're using? I think it would be beneficial to the commissioners to see the sampling of the products and the color. And then secondly, if you could look at, is there a way to get the washer and dryers out of the basement and into the apartments? I think it just makes a better quality apartment. And if possible, I'd like to see if you could do that for safety reasons in the basements. If you could just look at it. And now we'll go to questions from the commission, if you have any questions.
And Chairman, if the siding is a CertainTeed Main Street, it's a .042 siding. We could pull that up on screen if we wanted to look at the colors, or
All the supply houses have samples.
Yeah.
They have sampling boards and
Time to get to that,
samples and the shingle and everything. So
we'll get those. Yeah, absolutely.
I'd appreciate it. Anthony?
I had a question which no one has brought up, and we always see the front elevation, but I've driven around a few different type projects, not here in town, and explain the heating and air conditioning and your gases and your meters. Where are you putting all those?
Yeah, it's a really good question.
Because I drive by one, it's on the coast near the Rhode Island border in Stonington, and you drive down the road, it's this building jumps out of the ground, and all I see are HVAC compressors and 50 gas meters. So is it one big meter going into this Anyway, I'm turning this into two questions now. Yeah. Like multiple meters, how's it gonna?
Yeah. We expect to have one gas meter per building.
Per building, okay.
Per building, and we will have multiple electric meters, but we're getting those inside the building as well. Okay. We've got this site is unique. The way we've arranged them around the town green, we have a very clear front and back with these buildings, and none of the backs face the public way. So what we're proposing is that on the rear upper, right behind the red, that there'll be a small flat roof section of the roof, and that's where any compressors will go. They will not be on the ground. They'll be up there, and they'll be tucked and hidden away from view. They'll still be accessible through a roof hatch. You'll be able to get up there and do maintenance on them, but they won't be, we also don't, heat pumps are popping up everywhere.
No,
they're all over everything. Yeah. So that's where we're proposing to put them.
Pretty long in that building. If you put them out back, you're running 70, 80, 150 feet to get from one unit to the other.
Correct, and it'll get over that line set limit. So we're trying to get them on the rear of the buildings, not visible from the public way, and we also need to keep them from sound from annoying folks who live there.
And if I may, I have one other question on sound. You brought it up in your packet, your Schedule B, the sound insulated walls. with this building, and the systems are you doing any sound partitions between the floor system, like using gunite, or not gunite, gyp floor?
Gypcrete.
Gypcrete. How are you mitigating sound? You know, is there a plan, C channel, H channel, J channel?
Yeah, the typical we're doing a lot these days is, I think one nice thing is we've got carpet and vinyl planks, so there's softer materials than we might have had with hardwood floors. So there's some of the impact is decent, but there will be, our proposed assembly is it's an Avantech flooring, a 3/4, sound bat insulation below that, inside the truss, and then below the truss will either be rubber sound isolation clips with one layer of drywall, or it might be RC channel and 2 layers of drywall.
Okay.
So it's a really good question. People, it's one of the biggest complaints in multifamily.
Are you
is
doing
hearing
it on
people.
the corridor walls too?
Correct.
So you have
Yes.
sound on the walls, intermittent between the units, and then in the floors?
And the typical between walls is a staggered stud wall between units so that there's no
Okay.
stud that goes between. Yeah,
Cool.
with sound
Thank you.
insulation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sobeski.
Quick question. You mentioned this monitoring system. Will there be somebody there 24 hours a day monitoring this?
A person on site?
Yes.
No, it'd be an typically automated system that will flag. Is that correct? Mark? It goes back to a central station, but there wouldn't be typically a person on site waiting for something to happen, no.
So where would the central station be? May I ask that?
The central station in the building is typically in the utility room, which is probably in the basement, but the central station is the central fire station as it goes. Yeah, fire alarm.
Monitors it and they'll report back.
It'll go to a fire alarm company, they'll report back to the.
Same thing for the police then, I would assume.
Correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fox.
No, I'll wait for the site plan for that.
Okay.
Mainly because
Commissioner Woods?
I was going to ask.
I'm okay with questions to the building. Let's do that now. Okay. It's a good start. I like it better. I like the colors made a big difference. Personally, I would like to see those dormers that are cut into the roof a little bit bigger. I just think it would proportionally it kind of looks like they're just stuck up there right now. It is starting to break it up, but, and then on the bottom, instead of the 8-inch, if you know, maybe masonry, whether it be, you know, thin stone or some sort of stone, it would make the buildings look so much richer to me. And
Yeah, we looked at the larger dormers across the roof, and we were worried that we needed a good relationship to bring them to, and so that we have the living rooms, but we ended up with an asymmetrical spacing, and that felt a little odd to us, that it felt better to have a major and a minor, but that's, I hear your comment, and, yeah.
And then, just picking up on one of your comments, I didn't hear the whole thing. Are just the stair towers fire sprinklered, or is the entire building?
The entire building is fire sprinklered. I was just referring to the fire safety of the stair towers, that they have a 2-hour separation
Separation, okay.
from the rest of the building.
But all the units are,
Correct.
okay. I thought so, but I
Yeah.
didn't know if I misunderstood that, and it was just the
No, just wanted, it's good to get that in the record.
I know, I will try to pay more attention. Mr. Claffey. That's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I think I'm too.
Okay, I do have a couple questions for Attorney Hollister concerning the workforce-assisted housing. Could you explain to the commission why this is needed? If you were applying as an 830G, wouldn't you be able to do everything that you needed to do in the PD zone that you're asking to do now? So, but instead you're asking for this workforce-assisted zone, and there's no other place in the town of Newington that we can put it. And how do you explain whether or not that is, whether we're spot zoning that workforce zoning or not?
Okay, a couple of responses. First, we have several court cases regarding 830G that say that spot zoning just is not a consideration. The state actually encourages site-specific zoning for affordable housing. And the reason, go back to my original presentation, is they want commissions like this one to be able to consider individual sites without thinking about whether there's going to be a town-wide, we realize that even though the density, as Mr. Miners pointed out, is actually less than some of your other zones. It is a more dense zone. It's not a single-family zone. It's not a townhouse zone. So we wanted to give you the ability to think about this site and this particular design and this particular set of rules without considering other sites. Now, as far as the PD zone, my understanding of PD zones from the case in which you were involved a couple years ago is that's a commercial zone. But we resorted to 830G because 830G gives the applicant the ability to combine the residential program rules with the affordability rules with the site-specific dimensions. And it's the only state program that allows you to do that. It also gives you flexibility and a standard, which is in my initial presentation, unless there's evidence in the record of a public health or safety issue that would arise from the development, there's an obligation to see it through to approval. So there's multiple reasons, but on top of that, as I think I also said in my opening presentation, the model that's being used here for the land use application has been used now, well, since 1990. I've done myself over 100 of these applications, and about 60 of them are built, and they're all very successful. It's a program that works. We didn't invent something specifically for Newington or this site. This really is a time-tested model. I mentioned that the town of Griswold on Monday night of this week, Ford Dakota approved almost an identical site plan and structure. So so we're going with the time-tested model. My last response is, the PD zone doesn't have any of the affordable housing requirements in it, and we do that for the town's benefit, so that everything that we're holding ourselves to in terms of the maximum rent and the maximum household income is something that you can enforce. Your zoning enforcement officer can enforce in the normal way that you would deal with zoning violations. There will be records of the tenancies, the applications, and the rents that will be available to the commission to make sure that we're doing everything as we represented, but we want to give you the tool to make sure that to hold us to that standard. So for all those reasons, that's the reason for the structure.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Any questions from the commissioners? Town planner, do you have anything?
Not at this time.
Now, Mr. Chairman, we're done with what we wanted to bring you up to speed tonight. As I said earlier, I'll give Mr. Minor an extension to the 26th, so we should hold the hearing open. And my one takeaway from tonight is that based on your question about the building permit, I will go back with Mr. Bristol and maybe even your town attorney. We'll take another look at the condition of approval, and we'll also get input from the Conservation Commission, because probably the two commissions should have the same conditions, so we're not at cross purposes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, at this time, I'll open it up to the public for any public wishing to speak in favor of this application, please come forward. Limited to 2 minutes per person. Anybody wishing to speak in favor?
Yeah, that's fine. Yep. You got 20 feet right there. Well, in areas.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Kyle Barrett. I'm a resident of Newington. So as someone who has grown up in affordable housing and based on extensive research into affordable housing, I can tell you that affordable housing does not reduce local home values, does not increase crime, does not increase taxes, and does not have negative impacts on the social fabric of communities. Quite the opposite. Research has shown that diverse and mixed income communities have shown to improve student outcomes and increase economic mobility for families. And further, I think the team has submitted all of their evaluations and shown that the housing will have minimal impact on our school system and will provide a source of tax revenue for the town. So as I said, I currently live in Newington. I'm looking to purchase a home here, and I can tell you that housing values in Newington are doing quite well. They show no sign of decreasing. In fact, that's one of the major reasons I think we do need affordable housing, is because the housing prices are so high in Newington. So as of right now, I'm sure many of you read this already, but 8.1% of Newington's housing is considered affordable, and more than 33% of renters here are considered burdened by their housing costs. So looking at some of the numbers, to afford a typical two-bedroom apartment in Newington right now, a person needs to earn just over $24 an hour. and a person earning minimum wage needs to work nearly 90 hours a week to be able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. So, we're not talking about, we're talking about, EMTs in town, we're talking about teachers, teachers' assistants, that this housing would be helping out. So I know the task at hand is to decide whether this is an appropriate site for the development, but speaking to that, I think given the proximity of the development near the new fast track, near the grocery store, a bank, and other resources, it's actually incredibly well suited for the housing development. As somebody who works directly with families, I can tell you it's extremely important to have those resources close to home, and even better to have them within walking distance. I know there were issues brought up related to sidewalks to make that actually accessible on foot, and it sounds like there was some initial effort to make that happen, so I see that as a legitimate concern. But to say that if, given that there is pedestrian access, that will actually reduce reliance on vehicles of people that live there, so it would actually could possibly even reduce the traffic that's in the area, because folks might be moving there specifically to use fast track and not have a vehicle. So in staying on the topic of traffic, I do drive home on Cedar Street every day at 5 p.m., so I can tell you, it is a headache. But based on the assessments that I've seen, it's not going to make that headache any worse. And to the point I think you brought up as well, I have actually been on there one time when it wasn't a fire truck, but a police car during nonstop traffic right at 5 p.m. was able to get through. I mean, it was, a little bit hairy with people having to go over on the sidewalk, the cars having to go on the sidewalk, but they were able to get through on there. And actually, I think because of that traffic, how heavy it is, the cars are actually moving slower. So as far as danger to pedestrians, I feel like would be less because it actually is so much traffic going on there. And so I know a lot of the other concerns that I have on here were kind of already addressed. So the proximity of the railroad tracks and regarding the walkways. So it sounds like there is effort on the developer's side to make adjustments for all of that. And as well as the remediation of the site, sounds like everything is been identified and moving forward quite well. So I guess just to say in sum, I don't believe that any of the concerns voiced thus far really constitute an imminent threat to resident safety, to my safety, and don't believe that those concerns should be used to close the door on working families that would be possibly moving here, including myself. So I thank you for the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wishing to speak in favor of the application? Please come forward, state your name and address for the record.
Kathy Flaherty, 139 Cedar Ridge Road. I actually did testify at an earlier hearing, so I'm not going to take time tonight. I just wanted to put this on the record. Ryan Beach, who lives at 16 Kenlock Street in Newington, and I penned an editorial that was in the Connecticut Viewpoints. People may have seen it online, but I just wanted to put it on record for the commission.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else wishing to speak in favor of the application? Please come forward. Anybody else? Anybody wishing to speak in opposition to the application, please come forward.
Good evening. My name is Christopher Damon. I live at 24 Ponderosa Lane. So I brought up obviously last meeting on the 22nd, we brought up some concerns about traffic. I'm not going to kind of really address that, but something that was brought up tonight, excuse me, that's kind of throwing a concern. So it was brought up with a bus stop and kind of a right-of-way sidewalk. So I guess the question I have is, knowing where I live on Ponderosa, it's a no outlet street. The parents have to bring their children to and from the bus stop on the corner of Maple. So hence a lot of them drive up because of the weather or something, and they don't want their kids hanging out in the inclement weather. So the buses, if they're not going to be allowed to go into the property, they're going to stop on Cedar Street. So that is, I mean, it's going to be a minor impact, but on the side roads, people don't stop for the buses. So in the morning, yeah, when the traffic's heavy, the traffic's going to be slow, people will stop. But on the evening hours, when the kids are coming back home, we know for a fact that people in the opposite direction going east are not going to stop for the buses. It's horrible to say that, but the people in the far right lane more than likely are just going to keep whipping by doing their 40, 50 miles an hour they usually do. So I guess with that other concern with the bus stop that's there, is that also going to be used for the regular public transportation, or is that strictly for like the school buses and so forth like that? Another quick concern I had was you talked about a chain link fence that's going to be going around the property. And is that going to be viewable by cameras or lights, or is that going to be kind of hidden in the dust? Because we know as well, working in some of the areas I go to, areas like that become gathering grounds. People climb the fences and hanging around and doing the undesirables that they will do. And then the final point I got is noise. And I don't mean like as in the noise that they're going to bring. Since the busway, or since the train tracks have been redone, it seems like the noise volume from the trains itself has actually increased. And maybe it's me, I don't know. And with the increase of train traffic, now these guys are going to be slightly closer to the tracks than we are. Has anybody taken into consideration the noise level that they're going to have that's going to be an effect towards them with the trains? And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to speak in opposition to this application, please come forward.
Dana Havens, 113 Stoddard Avenue. It's not exactly opposition, but I have a question. The parking that I see drawn up on that slide, so the bulk of it appears to be up by the road by that school bus stop. And since they are planning on having a train station there, and since there is a bus stop, a city bus stop near there, wouldn't that cause concern of just general public parking there to be able to catch some form of mass transportation?
Okay, thank you. We'll have to look into that. There is no plan right now today for a train station to go on Cedar Street, a train depot. They did make a presentation to the town council, and it was told to them that it could be 10 to 15 years out. It was my understanding that we were reviewing a totally different area, and we didn't even know that the council was looking at Cedar Street. So I just wanted the public to know that as of now, they have not come back to TPZ and asked us to look at anything, and I don't believe the council has asked for it to go over on Cedar Street. It's just being discussed. Anybody else like to speak in opposition or have a concern? Please come forward.
Good evening, Gary Bowles, 28 Burden Lane. At your last hearing, I did mention about a rear ingress and egress, and that still is very important. I wish you would make that a condition of the development. I know there's private property in back of that, but I did talk with people at DOT, and they did say that that could be worked out with the town and the developer and the private property owner. It's very, very important. Now, Cedar Street, of course, we all know, is clogged with traffic at like 8:30 in the morning, 9 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning, in the afternoon, 4 and 5. When you have 4 lanes of traffic that is just non-stop, I don't know how an emergency vehicle is going to get in there. You can say, well, they'll honk their horns, their sirens, but where does this traffic go? I've seen it where it's just total standstill. I just think that you do need to have a rear ingress and egress. And the other thing that I would like to see made a stipulation of this development is that the total cleanup of the environmental situation be done before any shovel gets put into the ground. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak in opposition?
Rose Lyons, 46 Elton Drive. Once again, this isn't pro or con. I just had a question. I understand that the applicant has given you a copy of the screening process for this development. I'm just curious, and I've asked before, how they based, and I know they took it for some study, that the students going into this development would be relocations. I'm just wondering, like I said, having applied for senior housing, which I would not be eligible for this because I am retired, but just wondering if Newington residents are going to be given some sort of point preference, and just a curiosity thing, and if that screening process application is available to the public, I could maybe get it from the town planner. Commissioner Payne, Chairman Payne, I appreciate you bringing out the fact that the items that were addressed tonight were suggestions made by the town planner, and from what I understood the other night at Economic Development, that our Economic Development Director also had some input into the questions that were presented. And I hope that all the questions of the residents are going to be answered as well, and I think that they will do that. One other thing with the environmental cleanup, I'm just curious, and I think I mentioned this also before, that will DEEP take the report of the licensed environmental professional, or will they come out and do a audit and make sure that everything that they require has been done? Because having listened at conservation, I was of the opinion that they stated there that only a certain percentage of projects that are cleanups, the remediation, is actually signed off on by DEEP. I'm liking what I'm seeing as far as the concept of the look of the project. I think the first presentation left a lot to be desired, and I know that you guys are going to do your best with the materials and everything else. I'll leave that up to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to answer the environmental questions now or afterwards?
I can wait to, yeah.
Okay. Anybody else wishing to speak in opposition?
Excuse me, Mady Kenny, 53 Crestview Drive, and I'm not speaking in opposition. I just have some questions, which unfortunately I was not able to attend other meetings, so they may have been answered already, and for that I apologize. I am curious about entrance and exit into the facility. Is there going to be a traffic system, traffic light set up on Cedar Street to make that a safe situation? The other thing is, when Stanley asked about safety issues regarding large equipment going in to help with any problems that should occur, I'm not clear. Apparently they can access 2 of the 3 buildings. I'm not sure. I was trying to pay attention, but I'm not sure what I heard. But it seemed like there was a safety concern regarding assisting the further building. And the other question, which may be quite picayune, but having got my varsity letter and meeting attendance, I was wondering if the next time there's a presentation, whether when discussing some of the drawings that were presented, whether a laser light, I don't know which is north, south, east, and west on those things. I didn't know where the chain link fence was going to be and that type of thing. Nobody else may have that problem, but I do, and it would be helpful to me, so thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Just to answer one of your questions, the site has been reviewed by the fire marshal, and access has been, the fire marshal has agreed that he can get access to all the buildings safely, and the only thing he asked for was an additional fire hydrant and some changes on the radiuses of the curves. So I hope that answers your question. I think Commissioner Sobieski's concern was actually driving down the road of Cedar Street itself and getting a safety vehicle down the road. But if that's a problem, if that becomes a problem, we'd have to shut every business that was on Cedar Street down, because if it's unsafe for this business or this property or this developer or applicant, then it would be unsafe for anybody else that has a business on Cedar Street.
And she also asked if there would be a traffic light there.
Yes, there is going to be a traffic light there, and it will be an operational traffic light. And just so you understand, the state DOT will be reviewing these plans, and it's a state road, and if they feel that there's something else needed, then they're going to put those requirements on the developer. Anybody else wishing to come up forward? If you have, if you're in opposition, Anybody else like to come up forward? If you have, if you're in opposition or if you just have a question and you'd like to come forward, please come forward now. Okay, we'll go to the applicant to see if the applicant would like to rebut or answer any of these questions now or wait.
Well, Walter, for the record, just to respond to some of the concerns and questions from the public. The first question or concern was with the buses and knowing that potentially people in the opposite direction are going to, in the far right lane, are going to go past. Of course, we can't control what the public does. However, from a student safety perspective, the students will be getting out and they will not be crossing the street. They'll all be going into the development. So there's some measure of, of safety there.
If I could interrupt you 1 second, I just want to put on the record too, I was going through the rear reminder and I noticed that the town of Newington posted all its stops for the bus stops for the year. And there are a few other bus stops on Cedar Street, so I just want to get that on the record. So, and they're totally in control of that. The school department, they make sure that everything is safe. I'm sorry for interrupting. Please continue.
Not at all. Thank you. The next concern was, or question was, is this going to be used for public transportation? The answer is no. This is for the bus company, for the school kids. The next one was, is the fence on the left-hand side at the top of the slope, is that going to be a gathering place for nefarious activities? That's going to be on the clearing side, so it's not going to be tucked back in the woods. It's going to be viewable to anybody from that development, so it's not going to be a place people can hide. The next question was, are people going to potentially use the parking that's closer to the street who are not residents, people looking to park there and walk other places? The answer is, well, again, we can't control what the public's going to do. That is a management issue, and that there's a full-time person, staff person there. There's going to be people who are residents are going to have stickers on their cars, so that will be able to be monitored. And if people from the public are going to come and park there, then there's a method that they can get tickets. We can contact police, and we can get them off the site. So, again, we can't control what people are going to do, but we have something in place to control that. That was it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Robert Bristol again, for the record. There was a question from the public regarding the possibility of the Connecticut DEP conducting an audit of the closure verification after everything is completed. Yes, there is always a possibility that the Connecticut DEP can come in afterwards and want to do an audit of the work that was done. However, in this case, this site is actually fairly straightforward compared to most of the verifications that we do. A lot of the properties have 100 years of industrial history with a lot more complex environmental issues than this site. So it is fairly straightforward, and the DEP focuses on generally very specific things during their review process. They're looking to make sure that the site was adequately investigated, and they also key in on to make sure that the groundwater compliance monitoring has been adequate in order to meet their requirements. So we're aware of very specific things that the DEP can key in on as part of the review and to determine whether or not there would be an audit. But this site, I think, is pretty straightforward enough. So I feel anyway that it's very unlikely that they would want to audit.
And do they have to approve or inspect and check off anything for this site, I would assume?
Yeah, so once the audit is done, the DEP within I think either 30 or 45 days would typically issue a letter to indicate, in most cases, to acknowledge that they're not going to conduct an audit, or in those rare cases to indicate that they are looking for specific information. And oftentimes, even if they do an audit, in most of those cases, by supplying them with additional information, you can usually satisfy with what they're looking for.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to give the public one last chance as a rebut. If there's anything that the public has that they want to rebut, either for or against, I'll give you one last opportunity to come up. Okay, any other questions from the commissioners? Oh, I'm sorry. Come forward and state your name for the record, please.
Hi, Witold Pupek, 67 Boulevard, Newington. I want to state that I'm sorry for my English. It's my foreign language, the weak one. As we all know, with the time, there is more traffic and all of the roads getting busier and busier. So my concern is that in 10 years from now, this place might be really dangerous for the people that gonna be living on that street. And especially with Hartford being really bad on the traffic and people using Cedar Street as a connector between major highways, this place might be really, really dangerous. And somebody mentioned earlier that doesn't matter if this is going to be this project or any other business. And I disagree, because with the business, if there will be a really bad traffic, people usually be avoiding the place. So, like I said, I believe this will be, in the future, this will be a really safety concern for the 100+ families living in that project.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else from the public? Okay, we're not going to close this public hearing. We're going to leave this public hearing open. And is the applicant have anything else? Do we have questions for him under the site plan? And does the applicant have things that you want to review with us under the site plan?
I think we've covered everything.
Okay. Commissioner Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a few questions.
Okay. One second. Can we do those questions now, or do we have to hold the site plan?
Well,
what do you think?
We have approval of the minutes next on the agenda, but the next item after minutes is this item, so we could go right on.
All right, why don't we move to that real quickly then? All right, Commissioner Fox, if you could, let's see, we have, next thing on the agenda is approval of the minutes. I'd look for a motion.
Make a motion.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any comments or changes on the minutes? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And if I could have one of the commissioners read our next petition, petition 26-18, under new business, please. Commissioner Woods, please.
Petition 26-18, site plan approval at 550 Cedar Street, Cedar Point, in accordance with Connecticut General Statute, Section 8-30G, Dakota Partners, Inc., applicant, Stop and Shop LLC, owner, Timothy S. Hollister, 1 Constitution Plaza, Hartford, Connecticut, contact.
Okay, thank you. Now, Commissioner Fox, if you have questions under the site plan, you could address it to the applicant, please.
Okay, thank you. All right, through the chairman, first of all, looking through the site plan here, I haven't seen anything about lighting. I mean, what kind of lighting are you going to have? After all, in the text amendment, it calls for a specific type of lighting, soft lighting.
For the record, Will Walter, page C 7.00 is a photometric plan.
Okay, that's right.
And what we're proposing is full cutoff. There's a graphic of the light poles, fluted light poles. They're 17 feet high. And we're providing sufficient lighting in the parking lots. Typically, the industry standard is 1 foot candle for parking lot and pedestrian lighting, walking on sidewalks, things of that nature. We are providing that. We're meeting the town regulation. We're meeting the industry standard. Additionally, one thing that I believe this commission asked for was for wall packs to be put behind the buildings for safety. We have added those on the buildings.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all for the lighting.
Commissioner,
Oh, CISA, I'm sorry.
Commissioner Claff, are you
No,
all set?
I'm all set with that
Yeah,
one
so,
question.
I know it was mentioned before, and I think in, excuse me, the town planner's memo to the applicant talking about elevators. And if the washing machines especially are gonna stay in the basement, and we have some handicapped people here on the first floor and, you know, either one of the buildings or all the buildings, I really don't think they would be comfortable or able to go down the basement and do a wash once a week. Or if, you know, even if they're on the top floor, they have a bad accident, you know, they might have to use the elevator, and, you know, for moving things in and out. So I would ask that you do try to accommodate the buildings for elevators.
I'm gonna have to defer to the architect, but it's my understanding that it's designed to code, and that's all I know about it.
Any other questions? Commissioner Claffey?
I have a question on the site plan. Sure. Is your parking lot going to have for the parking spaces stop sticks or concrete block stops?
No, we do not like those. They become an absolute headache and a nightmare for plowing. And so we typically do not like to put those in.
Just wanted to know. Thank you.
Yep, welcome.
Commissioner Sobieski?
Yes, have you explored the possibility of trying to buy rights to put a second access and entrance in the back part out to alumni?
I
The
don't
reason why
believe so.
I'm asking is because if something happens and the front entrance is tied up, nobody can get in or out. Most of our recent developments have both entrances, like the old Dayton Apartments on Main Street and Faith Court have two entrances. I'm just asking a question because I think that is a safety concern of mine also.
The answer is no, we have not explored that.
Do you plan on it?
No, thank you.
Do we plan on it? Not at this time.
I have another question on the site.
Commissioner Claffey?
Question on the site plan. I talked earlier about, or asked a question about one main gas meter going in, or line. How are the electrical, I want to call them ground transformers, the big green boxes is also known. Am I just missing it, or is there a plan here that maybe depicts where those might be? I know it's way out because it's something that the power company really dictates for you. Maybe, I don't know, am I
No,
missing
it's
it?
C4.00 utility plan. And we're coming in off the street underground.
Yeah.
And we have, if you look, the main electric comes right up underground to the northwest corner of the
Green.
the center green.
Yeah.
And then it goes left, there's a little transformer
Goes right, okay.
for the clubhouse. It goes right, there's a transformer that goes to both those buildings that's tucked, see the one tucked behind
Yeah,
north of building C?
gotcha.
And the other one, I believe, is on C4.01. Where's that other one? I mean, we're gonna obviously work with Eversource.
No, I didn't, I
But
thought of it for
yeah,
sidewalks and some other, I didn't ask for where they're gonna be low, now I see, so I just wanna see how they coincide with sidewalks and the pedestrian, feasibility to bypass them, et cetera, they don't become a jungle gym type thing. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other commissioners' questions?
That's it for me, thank you.
Town planner?
Not at this time.
Commissioner Woods?
The sidewalks on the interior, are they bituminous concrete or concrete sidewalks?
Bituminous concrete on the interior, except for where there's handicap ramps. We're gonna have concrete curbing everywhere. Bituminous sidewalk in the interior. Where there's handicap ramps, those are gonna be concrete handicap ramps.
With
The monolithic.
monolith,
Yep,
okay.
exactly. We've just found
You know
it's.
what I meant.
Those are, the handicap ramps, the tolerances are so fine.
Yeah.
That to do bituminous with those, could be problematic.
And precast concrete curbing, correct? That's what the plans show through the site.
I would
620.
Yeah, we-
Assuming it's throughout the whole site, it shows a detail for it.
Correct. It's, well, the concrete curbing, the majority is gonna be precast. The concrete curbing adjacent to the concrete sidewalk will be a monolithic pour.
I saw that on the plan. Yes, okay. Just a suggestion, most of your sidewalks butt up against the parking area. It makes it extremely difficult for maintenance, specifically in the wintertime. For snow plowing, unless it's done with a loader, most of the snow gets pushed straight in on top of those walks. So if you could get some sort of a buffer, in some areas you might not be able to get it. I see that they are a little closer to the buildings, but some areas you definitely can do that. I just think it would, from a maintenance standpoint, and again, use of the sidewalks through the winter months, it would make it more pedestrian friendly.
We'll take a look. The issue becomes,
I know it's difficult, it's a balance.
well, no. What I'm saying is, it's a tight site, but the issue really that I see is people are gonna park and they're gonna wanna get right on the sidewalk instead of walking through the parking lot to get to a sidewalk.
And I hear you, but then put 2 feet of snow on the sidewalk and you're not walking on the sidewalk.
Mm-hmm.
And in a perfect world, there's no cars in the parking lot, and you push snow to the ends. Unfortunately, we don't live in that perfect world, so you plow in between the cars, and it just gets pushed in. Again, I'm involved in this, it makes a nightmare for the poor individuals that have to try to clean that.
Maybe we should come up
Thank you.
You're welcome. Commissioner Fox, did you have anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through the chairman. Aside from, full concrete sidewalks, I have to agree with Commissioner Woods, having snow plowed along for a while. It's a lot easier with that little right of way there. And just one more, Mr. Chairman. As far as the facades are concerned and the elevations, I agree with Commissioner Woods that it is better than it was, but to me, it still looks like kind of a hospital. It still doesn't jump out at you. It's still, you still have the long sections of, just flat casement windows and vinyl siding. I guess you could have made, more, obvious dormers, but, the way it is, I guess, ideally, and I was, after looking at the previous projects that you've done, like in Suffield and in Brookfield, Connecticut, especially, they have sliders and balconies and balustrades over the entrances rather than have these plain, kind of lean-to entrances. I personally, I would rather see that, and I think it would be a much better looking deal. Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners?
One more.
Yes.
I think this would probably go to Attorney Hollister. Is there any data that you could show us on the number of people that are expected to live here that will not have transportation, that will depend on public transportation? Is that data available to us?
Commissioner, I will look for it before we convene. I don't think there is any, but, one of the realities is that if someone is unable to drive and totally dependent on transportation, they're gonna think twice about whether this is the right place for them to live. But there's a lot of other people who will say this is the perfect place to live, so that's a trade-off.
And I brought up the concern before, and I think you know where I'm going with it.
I will look for that data.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there's nothing else from the commissioners, I think that's it, unless the applicant has anything else that you'd like to add. I want to thank you very much for all your responses. And we're going to move on to...
The next meeting is the 26th, right?
Yes, that's correct. So we have...
Rizzo approval.
We have we're adding to the business, let's see, petition 37-18, TPZ approval, section 3.23.1, accessory outside use for tent sale at 3388 Berlin Turnpike, Rizzo Pools, Albert Rizzo Incorporated, owner James Galvin, 3388 Berlin Turnpike, Newington, Connecticut, applicant contact. I'll look to the town planner to give us a report on this. This is something that was done by the applicant previously.
Right, and I don't think the applicant is here tonight because there was a miscommunication between him and he and I. He thought it ended up, he didn't think it got on the agenda, even though I told him it would be added at the last minute, so he's not here tonight. But in that folder, when you sat down tonight, Commissioners, is a copy of his application with the same plan from 2 years ago showing where the pool sale will be, and a photocopy of an aerial photograph, which turned out very dark, so it's hard to read or hard to look at.
The same one he had last
It's
time that goes
2 years
behind
ago. Yeah,
the entrance to Friendly's.
correct.
like,
Same location.
Same
Right.
look, okay.
And the dates would be from September 26th through October 2nd. I'm sorry, September 27th through October 2nd. Oh, yes. Mhm.
There were no, the last time he had it, there were no reports, any problems, or went late?
To be honest, I did not go back and check,
I don't remember.
but I don't
don't
remember
recall.
there being any.
Didn't know if someone wrote a letter and, or the.
I don't recall
Not that I,
Pen flew out into the pike, I was just asking.
good question, but I
Yes,
don't remember. Right.
The
I don't,
tent
I don't
folks.
believe there was any problems on it. It was 2 years ago. He didn't do it last year, but the year before, I believe.
Yes.
So I'll entertain a motion for petition 37-18.
So moved.
Does somebody want to read that?
I move to approve petition 17-18, excuse me, petition -37-18, TPZ approval, section 3.23.1, accessory outside use for tent sale at 3388 Berlin Turnpike, Rizzo Pools, Albert Rizzo, Inc., owner James Galvin, 3388 Berlin Turnpike, Newington, Connecticut, applicant. And contact.
Okay, motion has been made. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Claffey. Any corrections, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, the next thing on our agenda would be, we have some old business, and it'll be petition 34-18, special permit, section 3.116, restaurant at 2391 Berlin Turnpike, JGF Holding Company LLC, owner Matt Rusconi, applicant Dante Buffy, 108 Main Street, Collinsville, Connecticut. Contact. If everybody remembers, the applicant was able to answer all our questions, and we had no problems with this. It was just a matter of moving it forward for a vote. So if there's nothing from the town planner, or if the commissioners don't have any questions, I'll entertain a motion. I'll ask Commissioner Claffey if you could read this petition 37-18, please. I'm sorry.
3418.
Correct, sorry. Stand correct.
Petition 3418, special permit section 3.11.6 restaurant at 2391 Berlin Turnpike, JGF Holding Company LLC, owner Matt Rusconi, applicant Dante Bofi, 108 Main Street, Collinsville, Connecticut. Contact. I move to approve with conditions petition 34-18, special permit section 3.11.6 restaurant at 2391 Berlin Turnpike, JGF Holding Company LLC, owner Matt Rusconi, applicant Dante Bofi, 108 Main Street, Collinsville, Connecticut. Contact. Conditions. Number 1, the parcels at 262 Brockett Street and 2391 Berlin Turnpike shall be merged. Evidence of such merger shall be submitted to the town planner prior to a certificate of occupancy being issued.
Okay, motion made. Seconded by Commissioner Sobieski. Any questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Congratulations. I wish you luck.
Sorry you had to wait so long.
Oh, no problem. Appreciate you guys. Thank you. Have a good evening. Okay, there's no other old business. Town planner, is there any petitions for public hearing or anything coming up?
No petitions for public hearing.
Okay. Town planner's report, everybody received it. Do you have any questions for the town planner, or would you like to add anything?
I do have a temporary sign permit application to present to you in my, wearing my hat as acting CEO, but I don't have any town planner items unless the commissioners have any questions.
No, that's fine. You want to present that temporary sign?
Yep. Yeah, this is just 2018. Let's see, this is. Spooky Town, okay. The owner of the building at, I forgot already, 23. Yeah, actually, let me flip to the aerial. It's, no, that's not, there it is, yes, okay. Yeah, 2631, I've obscured it. Anyway, 2631 has requested permission to put a banner across the front of the building. The building is 184 feet of frontage, so they're allowed 184 square feet of sign. The banner that they submitted, however, 4x60 is 240 square feet. So I called her this afternoon and said, I don't see a problem with the banner, but you can't have 240 square feet. You can only have 185. So you'll need to either change it to 60 by 3 or some dimension to not exceed 185 square feet. But she knows that the commission has to approve it. I believe she's here tonight in case the commissioners have any questions.
Any questions from the commissioners? There should be no reason that they can't cut off for some of the side, right?
Mm-hmm. Just change the dimensions in some way.
Yep. All right.
Okay, no objection to that? Okay. In the past, did you actually vote to approve these?
I think we just all agreed, or we friendly.
Consensus?
Anybody have any problems with this, except you're going to ask the town planner to have them get it within the proper size?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, very good. Anything else?
Okay, no.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Oh, one last thing. How long is this going to be up for?
30.
Yes. According to their application, it would be from September. No, that's the date they submitted it. Well, she's right here, so.
How long will you have it up?
Oh, that's what she did not say.
The first week in November. I mean, we move out
Okay.
the first week in November, so we take our stuff with us, and I will absolutely change that to a 60 by 3.
Okay. Very good.
Should I resubmit that as well?
Not unless the.
No, we
commission wants
don't. We don't need it.
I'll just make a note
As long
on
as
the-
you comply with that, then you don't have to resubmit anything else.
All right. And do I also need to do for my certificate of occupancy that I'm working with the building plan? Will I need to come back as well and approve it by the board to open?
Not the CO. That all is done with administration and staff.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so
All right,
you won't
wonderful.
have to come back to this commission.
Wonderful.
Okay.
I enjoyed it.
Very good.
Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, is there anything else that you have?
No.
Okay. Any communications? No communications? Any questions for commissioners? All right, we're going to go to public participation for items not listed on the agenda. If you have anything, you're welcome to come forward. State your name and address for the record, and
How you doing? My name is Steve Clout. I live at 15 Spur Lane. I was just wondering about the agenda and when it's most up to date. I'm a little upset with myself. I just sat through a long meeting. It doesn't sound like the thing I'm here for is going to be talked about.
what were you here for?
Meadow Street.
Oh, yeah, that got removed off the agenda.
It's still online. Is there any way to?
Well, it was just adjusted at the beginning of this meeting. We took that, we removed it offline. I apologize, maybe I
got here
should have.
like 2 minutes later, whatever it was.
Yeah,
you guys
we-
talked about at the beginning.
Yeah,
Shoot.
yeah, I apologize.
No problem.
Is there a direct concern that you have, or we will have that back on our agenda? It'll be a public hearing, so,
Right.
it'll be at our next meeting on which
The
date?
26th. Right.
26th, okay. So I noticed a lot of drawings on the Cedar Street development. I was wondering if all those are going to be available, everything that you guys were provided, the environmental plans, the site plans.
Everything is available through the town planner. Anything that we receive is all public information.
Yes, and much of it is on the town planner page of the Town of Newington website. Some of the stuff that we just got tonight, I haven't yet posted on the town planner webpage, but it will be there within a day or so.
Okay. Very good. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
My name is Zofia Pelkowski. I own the house on Spur Lane, 12 Spur Lane, and I'm here for the same thing, for the same Meadow Street. I'm concerned about it.
Yeah, we're going to be discussing that at our next meeting
On the
on the
20,
22nd.
26th.
I apologize, 26th,
September 26th. What time?
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public wishing to speak? Okay, remarks from commissioners? Commissioner Claffey.
Mr. Planner, I have a question. What's going on with the axe throwing property? Not the company, just the whole property. I may have missed something in translation. Have we given it approval? Has it been approved by the town building committee or town building and given a CO? What, I just
Right.
refresh
Okay.
my memory.
Right. Well, as I know you remember, there was the issue of the axe throwing business, and the applicant had to get his own special permit for the business and his own special permit for the alcohol. But then there was the site, which the landlord had to come in and get site plan approval, which was coordinated with the axe throwing, but technically separate. Well, if you've driven by lately, you've seen the owner of the property has finally grassed and seeded the area that used to be a driveway, which was eliminated as part of the site plan. And if you notice, there's now the parking lot near the entrance where the axe throwing will be. So the site plan, which was had much effort, was finally completed by the applicant. It took about 3 or 4 forays by the applicant's engineer to get the plan correct and acceptable by the town engineer, but that finally happened. And once that happened, the chairman was able to approve the special permit for the axe throwing business. So they'll probably, in fact, they got the CO today, so they will probably be open in the next day or so.
Let me ask you this, and if it has to be directed to somebody else, has all the rear original site plan stuff for the business that was illegally operating out of the rear been complied? The grease traps, because there was a hazardous materials on that site in the back per sitting, and that business is still operating. So all the tenants and all those 2 businesses are fully been given a CO.
I don't know. I don't know.
Well,
If you call me tomorrow during the day, and I'll be able to.
I've seen a lot of activity there late at night prior to tonight, understanding that it was just, the CO was just issued, but the past 3 or 4 weeks.
But there's never been any problem with the other tenants.
No, but I think he's referring to whether
we're given approval.
No, the tenants were never given approval. That was a misunderstanding, which I see still perpetuates. The tenants themselves were never.
It was based on a site plan approval that was never approved till just the other day.
Right, but because the tenants themselves were never under your purview, it doesn't matter that those tenants are still there, even though that site plan never got finalized, because those tenants never needed your permission in the first place. You were concerned about those tenants in the context of how the site was going to be designed, but those tenants did not need your permission. They were and are a permitted use.
Okay.
No, it's not against a permitted use. It's more of their use was based on a site plan.
No, the site What the owner wanted to do back then, which was to bring in a driveway around the back and curve around, you were concerned about that circulation.
No, I
in
wasn't.
the
I was concerned that we.
Well, that was the
business opened up
only
without
concern.
getting site plan approval.
Well, that was, I have no doubt that some commissioners may have had that in their minds, but that was never an issue that was in front of you.
All right, let's,
No, it wasn't, because it was retracted.
No, I mean, it was never, when it was in front of you, it was not because of the tenants. They were
No, I
not.
agree with you wholeheartedly on that.
Okay.
all right,
Then-
why don't we look into that site and see if we can get a report for
Been
our next
asking
meeting?
for
We'll-
almost
we'll
2
get-
years now.
We're gonna get a report on it for our next meeting, on whether or not they've complied with, everything that they were supposed to comply with the
And
site
it-
plan.
And if it has to do with the building official, then I'll address it with them.
Well,
Because my point back 2 years ago was, you have a hazardous site.
No, they don't.
You have a hazardous materials handler operating out of that building.
Well, not really, but
placard and ready for our fire and EMS to
regulated,
run
but
in.
not hazardous.
Now, Commissioner Claffey, did you notice that, there's some fencing there at the rear? Were they fenced off the rear of the site?
Yeah,
Did you notice that?
It's
Now,
gated by an
it's
electronic
gated.
gate.
So my question to the staff would be, when that was never on our original plans, and it was supposed to be shared parking, so now the property owner has cut off the shared parking for the other tenants. They can't share that parking on off hours because it's all gated off. Is that
18-wheelers
correct?
And the 18-wheelers that sit in the new parking area for the new axe-throwing business. I'm
I'm not aware of,
Okay.
and I would be concerned about that also.
Yeah,
so
and
I'll
then
look into
what is
that.
there, 18-wheelers sitting in parking spaces outside the fenced area?
They've parked these.
Okay.
You guys don't see them because, and no offense to you, you only see the site 9 to 5. And for 2 years, I've watched 18-wheeler after 18-wheeler park there and sit there for days on end. And now we have this new business. And I don't want to shun him, but when he has 40, 50, 60, 70 people there for an event, where are they going to park? They're going to park next door. The gate plus just last night, 2 18-wheelers sitting in that guy's parking, which we are
It's
trying
supposed
to
to be for
massage
Montana Nights.
to, no pun intended, to work it between the two because they work on basically opposite hours.
Yes.
But
All
then
right.
the guy in the back's impeding the guy in the front's parking, which he spent all this time coming to us to get approval on. So I'm just.
I'll look into it.
This little.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Woods.
To COs, I'm assuming that the building inspector issues COs?
Yes.
Correct.
The zoning enforcement signs off first, and then the building inspector.
All right, so there is a process that before the building inspector will issue it, that he goes to the zoning enforcement officer, which in case is now you
Me.
acting before that happened. Okay, that's all I need to know. Thank you.
Any other comments, concerns from commissioners? I want to thank everybody, and motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?